Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, 2 p.m. Brussels time, and for some of you, I think this is session number 8 this week. As we're getting towards the end of this week of Safe Internet Forum activities, I hope you'll all agree with me. It has been quite an extraordinary week so far. Just to summarize, those of you who were lucky enough to be here on Tuesday already, you were able to see the big youth panelists kicking it all off with a big bang. On Wednesday and Thursday, we had our Safe Internet Forum main event with Professor Laura Lundy, who proved to be the perfect keynote to make us think from a child rights perspective about the many challenges and opportunities that children with diverse disabilities encounter online. Many of you have told us that you are very pleased with how we have managed to bring in the views and experiences from young European citizens with different types of impairment. And in our deep dive sessions, we've heard from industry, from InSafe network members, and from a wide range of education stakeholders who all have a role to play when inclusion in a digital world is at stake. Earlier today, we shifted our focus to the EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse, a side event which was hosted by our colleagues at InHope. And what better way to close this week with another side event, this time with a focus on Better Internet for Kids policy making. As chair of this final session, my role is quite straightforward. I would like to briefly start by making sure we all have a shared understanding of what we are talking about when we refer to Better Internet for Kids policy making. Because for sure, as was explained on Wednesday by Khalil Huana, the Deputy Director General at DG Connect, there currently is a lot of highly relevant legislative and wider policy work taking place at EU level. There is the European Commission's proposal on the Digital Service Act package, which is expected by the end of the year. There is the upcoming EU strategy on children's rights, which will surely have a strong digital component. We've recently seen the publication of the Digital Education Action Plan, which covers a lot of the topics we've been discussing this week. And this morning, we discussed in depth the EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse. And I could go on. However, when we talk about Better Internet for Kids policy in this specific side event today, you should primarily think of the house, which you should now see appearing on the infograph next to me or on top of me on screen. Because in 2012 already, the European Commission published its European strategy for a better internet for children, in short, the Better Internet for Kids strategy. And in various ways, it covered the 4 pillars, which you should now see on screen, with a goal to 1, stimulate the production of creative and educational online content for children, 2, scale up awareness and empowerment, including teaching of digital literacy and online safety in all EU schools, 3, create a safe environment for children through age-appropriate privacy settings, wider use of parental controls and age rating and content classification, and 4, combat child sexual abuse material online and child sexual exploitation. Interestingly, in the conclusion of this 2012 strategy, there's also a couple of sentences which speak to the need to establish an evidence base in terms of big policy making, by comparing public policies and activities across the EU. The idea back then already was to identify trends and emerging issues, to share good practices in promoting online safety and empowerment, in short, to try to learn from each other. And it's against this background that the big policy map was first conceived. The first big policy map report was published in 2015, and a second then followed in March 2018 to review progress made. And I'm truly delighted that I'm able to announce that today we have officially launched at betterinternetforkids.eu the 3rd iteration of the big policy map report, which further examines the implementation of the big strategy in 30 European countries, including all EU member states, Iceland, Norway, and the United Kingdom. And I think my colleagues will be sharing the link to the report in the chat. Now, I could go on to talk about this report for the next hour or so, but I appreciate that might not be the most exciting way to give you a flavor of what the big policy map is about. So what we've done instead is to try to put together not 1, but 2 panels. One of these panels will have a European focus, and we've brought together a mix of stakeholders, including Martina Wagner from the Swedish Media Council, Gerhard Polster from the Austrian Federal Ministry for Labor, Families and Youth, Szymon Wojcik from SaferInternet.Poland, Manuela Martra from DG Connect at the European Commission. And we're combining this first panel with another panel with a more global focus. Because as you all know, indeed, this has very much become a global policy issue. And this is also what we've been seeing for a while now, for instance, with Safe Internet Day being celebrated in over 170 countries. But also at this forum where we had people registering from 66 different countries, which goes well beyond our wildest expectations. For this second panel, we are very pleased to have Ella Sari from the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner Australia, Daniel Kartveld-Winter from the UNICEF Office of Research, Rodrigo Nem from SaferNet Brazil, and Narim Kashartrian from Safer Internet Armenia. The latter two, by the way, have also been involved in a recent SIC Plus pilot program on which, again, you should be able to read more on the Better Internet for Kids portal. And I think, again, we will share some relevant links on this in the chat. But as you can see on the slide, we will actually start with Professor Brian O'Neill from TU Dublin. And Brian authored the report which we are launching today. And he did so together with Stefan Dreyer from the Hans Bredau Institute, with support also from Brian's colleague at TU Dublin, Tui Din. Brian also happens to be the one person everyone I know will immediately think of when you mention Better Internet for Kids and policy research in one sentence. And Brian will first introduce key findings from the report, and he will then go on to discuss these findings and implications for policymakers both at national and international level in the two panels I've just briefly introduced. So Brian, clearly no pressure there. The floor is yours. I'm here to support, and I'll do my best to collect the many questions we will hopefully get from the audience in the chat and in the Q&A. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hans. Thanks indeed, first of all, for the invitation and the warm introduction to myself and my colleagues, indeed, who's worked with me on this report. Delighted to have the opportunity, and thank you to all the participants for joining this, the final session of Safer Internet Forum 2020. We're very much looking forward to a lively discussion and interaction, and very much welcome your questions and comments on the work that we're discussing, both in a European and a wide international context, and hopefully of interest to one and all. I'm just going to share my screen now to present some slides, just to give you a flavor of the overview of the report, which Hans has outlined for you. And again, just acknowledging that this is a collaborative effort between ourselves at TU Dublin, myself and my colleague Tui Ding, and Stefan Dreyer at the Leibniz Institute for Media Research, Hans Bredau Institute. And we've worked very closely with European Schoolnet and indeed many colleagues right across the InSafe network in producing this particular piece of research. Hans has set the scene very well because we are looking now since 2012 when the first European strategy for a better internet for children was launched, and with that an exercise to track and monitor its progress, its implementation, and that's the context for now the third iteration of the Better Internet for Kids policy map, and it's relatively unique to be able to trace and track a policy intervention of this kind with the involvement of so many different countries. And I think that's the value of the large body of data that we've been able to now collect as part of this. And the aims of our exercise, again, as Hans has set out and very much built into the original perspective for this, was to look at and to compare public policies and activities through the implementation of the BIK strategy, and to do that on a wide European level. And that's today we have the largest involvement within the BIK mapping exercise. And through the process of sharing knowledge and information, to enhance our understanding, not just in terms of achievements in progress in terms of BIK implementation, but also indeed policy making processes and what is proving effective and what can be improved. And through this, because we're now in 3 iterations, we can begin to see some of the patterns and some of the emerging trends. So that's what we hope you will find in today's report, which has been launched on the portal. To say a little bit about how our report and our investigation is structured, we look at a number of different dimensions of how policy is implemented at the national level. What are the individual components of this? And within this, we look at policy frameworks, first of all, because the European strategy for a better internet for children, the BIK strategy, is a communication. It's a large overarching framework offering guidance to member states, but it is in the form of that guidance, and how member states choose to implement it varies obviously considerably. So within this context, we look at the organizational factors and the kinds of policies that are chosen and that are followed, that work to implement its different measures. And then to look at the different methods and ways in which policy is both developed and carried out. Something that stands out through our investigations is looking at the varying different ways in which now there are many different actors within the policy process and how to effectively coordinate between those. Also in terms of policy design, the importance of a research base, a knowledge base to underpin good policy making and identifying priorities for decisions. That is a particularly important feature, and it's something that we're looking at within individual case studies. And thirdly, within policy making, to look at participation of all actors, but also we have a specific focus on youth participation, given its importance, of course, to the domain itself. Finally, in terms of the 4 pillars, there is a broad spread of activities within the overall strategy. So how extensive and how widely are we covering this in terms of actual implementation? And that spread of activities involves the input of many different stakeholders. So the involvement of these stakeholders working together makes ultimately for the success of the policy. So taking all these together, this constitutes a framework for collective impact. And that is a model that we have drawn on for the purposes, particularly in this iteration of the BIK map. We've looked at a theoretical framework to support the combination of different elements which make for more effective and impactful policy coordination. And that's something that we'll be discussing with the panel. To say a little bit now about some of the highlights, and we have quite a detailed report, and I should say that our report today focuses really at the European level. And there are 30 individual member states and countries who have contributed to this, all with further detail. But we have in the current report an emphasis at the overall European comparison. And there will be a further interactive online resource made available to explore at the country level. But something that we can say, and in terms of highlights of overall achievements, is that the field of better internet for kids has been very widely adopted by this stage in terms of now several years on, in terms of the development of an approach very much characterized by supporting better internet interventions. That this has been widely adopted. There's a core focus in many cases around online safety, and it has received very specific attention. But we see that there has been a wide resulting impact from the introduction of this strategy. There's also a very high level of awareness of it, which is important, and I think that it is a demonstration of how effectively some of the platforms for communication, for collaboration, have been to further disseminate the BIK strategy. And in nearly 3/4 of cases in our survey, countries have said that the BIK strategy has played a role, and sometimes a quite significant role, in the development of policies at the national level. By way of an overall finding, and this is to characterize at the European level, we see two broad trends or tendencies in the way that the BIK strategy has been implemented. Somewhat less than half have worked towards the development of specific policies and instruments of different kinds focused on BIK-related issues. In other words, related to supporting children and young people's use of the internet, their online safety, their well-being, and so on. So it has a specific purpose for that effect. More commonly, the issues and the policy topics within this field, as described through the 4 pillars, are represented in broader policies. They're as important, but they're positioned within a broader policy framework as part of a national remit towards support in this area. And it's something that we've been interested to explore, is the extent to which the BIK strategy, which is focused across the spectrum of activities to support internet experiences that are positive for young people, is that replicated at the national level with an equivalent vision for a member state or a country in terms of what better internet looks like in that case. And there are very few examples of that. And that's something that we're keen to probe by way of further investigation, because it presents one of the challenges in relation to policymaking in this field. So in relation to precisely that, some of these challenges around policy coordination, the increasing focus on issues associated with children's engagement with the digital environment has meant more activity, development of more policies, more public interventions in this area. And it means, of course, that there's strong governmental involvement and involvement of various different public agencies. And that is a strong finding. You can see here that 77%, and a big increase from less than half, 42% in 2018, now report that this is a multiple ministry field. In other words, it's typically 4 to 6 ministries at a national level have a direct involvement in this area. And therefore it calls upon close coordination and collaboration between these actors. And one of the deficits that we're finding is the availability of suitable platforms to enable that to happen and to happen effectively. So in our survey of the 30 countries, just 2 put forward specific multi-stakeholder bodies to coordinate BIK-related policies. There are many different responses and many different solutions to how to bring together the different components of policy, but an area that we focus on is in terms of how that is actually formalized in a visible and public-facing format. So one of those topics, as I mentioned, in terms of practices of good policy design, is in relation to evidence-based policy making. And here we have another strong finding and a big increase in the availability of research and data collection to support policy making. And this is a very positive development, because in previous iterations there was a gap here. It was another deficit. But we can see now that 67% of the countries are reporting regular data collection focused on children's use of the internet. And the availability of data in this field is so critically important, as I sure most stakeholders will agree. And that such evidence is influencing the design of public policies and is supportive indeed of the greater activity and the reports of different innovations and iterations of policy at the national level. There's also, at a lower level, but an increase in monitoring and evaluation of policies in place. Again, another aspect, another feature of good policy design. So that is something that is quite important and quite significant. That other dimension I mentioned in relation to participation in policy making, and just to focus on this issue about youth involvement, because in previous versions there was some, but insufficient in general terms of involvement in children. There is an improvement in this area, so that children are being systematically and directly consulted in over half of countries now. In approximately 1/3, that participation is indirect, and that could be by way of consultation through a survey or through research. But involvement of children in the policy process and as the key actors with an interest in this field, very few formalize that, even to the extent of involvement in policy making. So that is an important dimension, and one where there's definitely scope for further development and improvement. We have a large section in the report about implementation and many of the examples of implementation. In fact, we're going to bring many of these into the discussion with the panel to follow. So I won't go into great detail here, except to say that we are seeing positive signs in terms of Pillar 1 around high quality content for children and young people, where previously this was an area that was slower to develop. But now there is very much efforts, both through companies, through industry, through public broadcasting, various agencies involved in supporting positive content and indeed creative uses of digital media and technologies for young people. In terms of Pillar 2, which focuses both on teaching online safety, supporting digital media literacy, as well as awareness raising, this has always been a strength indeed of many of the different developments in the European context, and this is a thriving and indeed very healthy sector. Pillar 3, which looks at the area of creating and supporting, including through regulation, for a safer online environment. There have been many developments, and as Hans introduced and has been discussed during the course of the forum, many new developments in this area, and both through the implementation of the coming to effect of the GDPR and indeed the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. There are measures now that impact in this area, and we can see a step up in state involvement. And then finally, in terms of combating child sexual abuse and illegal content online, there's been an increase reported among member states. So all of this is very positive in terms of the new developments, and we're interested now to progress with the BIK to follow through and find out further where some of these developments are going. Just to say that our report gathers much data from member states, and we have teams indeed in all of the 30 countries who have collected this data on our behalf. Our job is to assimilate and collate and look to provide overall conclusions. And through this, we make some recommendations around how to support the better collective impact by these elements working together. And they're topics for discussion, and that's the intention through this process of sharing knowledge and also learning some of the lessons. And indeed, some of these I hope we can follow through in relation to the discussion today, both in European and indeed in a global context. And they refer to bringing that agenda together. so that we know that there is a common agenda in terms of what we're supporting for a better internet, strengthening the evidence base and using the instruments such as the BIK map and other research instruments to include looking at impact assessment and so on, ensuring that activities are working together and that there's a sharing indeed across countries to maximize expertise. The success of continuing developments such as platforms, including the Better Internet for Kids platform itself, which has done so much to bring individual countries and experts together. And importantly, in terms of the emphasis on a backbone organization or organizations to support this activity. This is, I suppose, the essence of good coordination. I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and just to return now, because at this point, as you can see, our findings cover many large thematic areas dealing with policy in this field. But importantly, it is the experience of individual actors, indeed member states who've contributed to all of this, who can really add further insight as to what this means at the national level. And so therefore for today, we thought the best way to elaborate on this is in fact to invite a panel, as Hans introduced at the outset. And for our first panel, indeed we have 3 participants and Manuela from the Commission, but 3 participants who are actively involved in contributing to the BIK map and know this in detail from the national level. So I'm very pleased to welcome again Martina Wagner from the Swedish Media Council, Gerhard Prostrow from the Bundesministerium für Arbeit, Family und Jugend, and Szymon Wojcik from the Polish Safer Internet Center. So I'm hoping that we can have an interactive discussion about the BIK strategy at the national level, and indeed experiences of each of you in this area. And I'm going to start with Martina, if that's okay. And Martina, to ask you about policy making in this better internet domain from the Swedish perspective. One of the questions we asked was about the influence that the BIK strategy may have had at the national level. And many countries said, well, it had an influence, but perhaps not a direct influence because countries work independently in this area. Can you say a little bit about Sweden's experience in terms of BIK policy making? And in particular, I'd be interested to know about how coordination among the different actors has worked. Very interested to hear your experiences of this.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. Of course, there are challenges in the topic itself. Better internet for kids, what is such, and who are the stakeholders in this area? I think we have all been struggling with this because there could be many or there could be few. But when working with a BIK map survey in Sweden, and here I want to say this is a coordination process in itself to do this mapping, but the Swedish team had to start off with interpreting children's use of the internet as referring to children's daily media use, placing its issues and questions in a broad context and within the responsibility of several policies, such as the government's democracy strategy, the national digital strategy for schools, and the library strategy, just to mention a few. And since this area is a topic for many ministries and policy areas, there is no national body formally mandated to execute a cross-policy coordination in Sweden. And we also have some work being carried out by NGOs in the civic sector, as I believe for many European countries. So it's not only cross-policy, it's also cross-sector work here. But the interesting is that some coordination is being carried out within different policy areas manifested in specific government assignments. And we have one ongoing such for the Swedish Media Council on enhancing media and information literacy by facilitating a national stakeholder cooperation. So I'd also like to say that cross-policy coordination, I mean, of course, it can be tricky, but we have a good Swedish example in our national implementation of the UN Convention of the Child. Sweden has a long track record of working with children's rights, and this means that all levels are synchronized in an overall direction in this work. And I think this is crucial for being successful. So in this children's rights work, it's been a well-functioning cross-ministerial working group for children's rights. So that has been easy. And when talking about these better internet issues, maybe the new AVMS directive, as you pointed out, could be such place for a good cross-policy coordination.
Very good. No, thanks, Martina. And that is interesting. So that there are a number of different ways, I suppose, in which actors have been brought together, and the law focusing on the rights of the child has been another driver to unifying actors on this. It's a really interesting example, and I'm going to return to that and some other examples in a moment. But just to turn now to Gerhard, if I could. And Gerhard, maybe if I could ask you a similar question from the Austrian perspective. And indeed, you know, you're speaking from a ministry position within the Austrian policy-making field within this area. Again, how would you characterize the influence of the BIK strategy? I think, you know, on this level of, you know, how direct or indirect it is. So, for example, how relevant has it been to the development of some of your key national policies in this area?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Good afternoon from Vienna, first of all. To your question, we have had some policies already in effect, like, for example, the positive rating of digital games, which is quite unique in Europe. Surely the strong ties to our Safer Internet Center, which is well connected, I'd like to state, has let us sharpen those policies who were already in effect, has let us sharpen them. Usually all of the federal officers who are involved in our national key politics, like, for example, our national youth strategy, which has a strong pillar on media literacy, for example, or the policy of a digital basic education for all schools in the secondary school system. These ties with the Safer Internet Center are essential for us. And the consultation process is a very good one. We have a very open communication with saferinternet.at. This is our way of having the BIK strategy in our country.
Very good. No, thanks. And I think that is an interesting observation, how the Safer Internet Center itself is an interface between these different influences. And as a Europe-wide network and infrastructure, it also reinforces at the national level. So I think that's been an interesting finding in many European countries, and it's to see how that operates. I'm going to turn to Szymon Wojcik from Poland, for the Polish Safer Internet Center, also for a response in this area. And Szymon, you work as an NGO partner, as part of the Consortium for the Safer Internet Centre. So from your perspective, how do you see the influence of a European influence such as the BIK strategy impacting and influencing development of policies in Poland?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian. Well, I think that generally the perspective of non-profit organizations, NGOs, is a little bit different, because I think generally organizations such as ours are a little bit more skeptical towards official policies and strategies. I think NGOs are more concentrated on direct action on their projects than on some wider policy framework. But on the other hand, in this case, I think it's a little bit different. And the reason is, my thoughts are very similar to what Gerhard has just said. So the network of safer internet centers, I see them as keepers of this policy. At least that's how it looked like at our country. And our aims as Polish Safer Internet Center as quite similar to the general aims of BIK strategy, and that's why we can somehow transmit these general issues into concrete actions in our country.
Very good. No, thanks. And I'm going to actually return to some of those concrete actions in a moment. I'll just return to Martina, if I could, first of all. And Martina, to ask you, one of the elements around good practice that we spoke about is evidence-based policy making. Now, Sweden, and I know from the report to the BIK map, has a strong track record in this field. So, can you say a little bit more about the programs in place there, the kind of work that you're doing in evidence data collection, supporting policy, and how important has that been?
Of course. Yeah, first, the Swedish system is with independent agencies, which means that part of the policy work is carried out at agency level, since politicians in Sweden do listen to expert authorities. So evidence has impacted on policy through this order. National surveys, quantitative and qualitative research do support policies by this order. And the Swedish Media Council, we conduct since 2005 a survey on children's media usage called Kids and Media. And it's a biannual survey conveying media use and attitudes towards media amongst children from 0 to 18 years old, and also attitudes towards children's media use amongst parents. And from this biannual study, we also do additional studies with certain focuses, like media use among children with disabilities, intellectual disabilities or cognitive. So this is, of course, a solid ground for a lot of decision making. And this long timeline of data of children's media experiences is important for anything which involves understanding the daily life of Swedish children. And since we have this strong children's rights issues as well, parallel to this, they of course are used together with each other. And we have an example, the government agency Ombudsman for Children in Sweden. This agency itself would be an evidence. The Ombudsman for Children was recently tasked with a mission to survey knowledge on how the health and relation of children and youth are affected by pornography. And here, in this assignment, the fact base of this mission consisted from references to the Kids and Media report that we do.
Excellent. Yeah, very good. And in terms of your own work at the Media Council in promoting digital and media literacy, because I understand you have a particular responsibility in this area, is that something that you're also tracking? And are you measuring? It'd be a very interesting area to come up with, let's say, good indicators that can monitor developments in media literacy.
Yeah, it's under develop. We are actually currently now developing a method for recurrent mapping of media and information literacy in terms of stakeholders and actions. But also we have a Nordic project for bringing forth indicators on meal skills, levels of meals in population. So of course, we need to work with all these aspects of media and information literacy for carrying out our own task in enhancing meal in Sweden.
Very good, very good. And just a reminder to everybody, if you have questions for any of our panelists, do please put it into the chat. Any of the aspects that we're raising or anything else you want to follow up with the panel. Gerhard, turning to you, likewise, there's a strong position on good evidence data collection in Austria. And I think you have a regular youth media study and youth internet monitor. So how important are they in the policy process? Are these studies well supported in the Austrian system?
Well, Brian, I would say data is key. Without the proper base consisting on actual and use-relevant data, our policies would be nice, but that would be it. In my opinion, you have to ask the children and the youth the right questions. For example, what social media networks are they using, and what problems do arise in using them, and with these questions then conveyed as studies, we can properly help them in any situation with our policies to help them and to help them live a light-hearted and inclusive experience in social media and the internet in general.
Very good, thanks. And Shimon, I wanted to ask you about activities that NGOs are very much involved in. Another aspect of the good policy design was around participation of young people. And you have an annual digital youth forum, which really does sound like very good practice in terms of youth participation. Can you say a little bit more about what this is and how it contributes?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think that the youth participation is a very big challenge for sure in Poland, but probably in other countries as well. And it is always very tricky thing how to engage actually young people and how to really empower them. Well, my foundation names is Empowering Children Foundation, but in practice it's really difficult, because often if you organize this youth participation activities, youth will tell you what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear. So that's a tricky one. Our idea is actually at the Digital Youth Forum that we organize, and we have also Digital Youth Portal, is to find young people who are already kind of youth activists, who are already active in the field of new technologies, and we invite them to share their experience, their opinion with other young people, and that's the way we can stimulate some discussions, some thoughts, and also that way we want to motivate other young people to be more active online, to have their own projects, their own initiatives.
Very good. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in that model and the interesting examples elsewhere about how best to involve young people in the policy debates and policy process. Can I turn at this point to Manuela Marta, Head of Safer Internet within the Commission Unit for Accessibility, Multilingualism and Safer Internet. Manuela, from everything that you've heard, I know we would be really interested to hear your wider reflections from the European Commission point of view, both in terms of what the BIK map is showing and in terms of some of the examples. So what are you seeing from an EC perspective on the strengths and weaknesses of BIK policy making as they're coming from the BIK map report?
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody from Luxembourg. And thank you for the question as well, because I think that is one of the few examples where if we make a list of the strengths versus the weaknesses, there is a clear longer list of the strengths. And so it's a bit difficult probably to choose one out of the many, but globally, of course, from the EC perspective, we are extremely glad and proud as well to see how much progress has been made under all pillars, including what we can define as the tricky ones. So the first one was the positive content pillar, which was a bit of challenge that we throw out there when we drafted the strategy, and it was also really the key feature to make a new step from the safer to the better internet. So we are extremely glad to see that there are more efforts, there are more investment, and there is progress in member states, because at the very beginning, back in 2012, so one of the weaknesses was that most of the material was available in English only, and only from some member states. So a lot of progress, lot of effort as well, including through the Safer Internet Network. For instance, through the competition and the many tools and the campaigns that we use to stimulate. Then another pillar where there is progress in a way that we were probably not expecting is pillar number 3, the safer environment, where there is this increase of the state public involvement. That is the side effect of the new EU legislation that has been introduced, like the GDPR and the Audiovisual Media Directive. So that as well is something very important to be noted. And I would say also in line, Brian, with your recommendation number 1, to try to align the agenda at European and national levels. And I think is also something that is worth better communication and visibility, because I think we are really heading towards a common, goal. And indeed, if you go back to the original document and the strategy, there were already inserted that this piece of legislation, the legal framework would have been gone in that direction, but now we are really there. Now, if we want really to focus on the strengths on the policy making, I will go back to what you have already discussed with Martina and with Gerard, the importance of the evidence. I mean, a sound policy making must have evidence about the new risks and trends. And so it's really a big, big step to now see that most of the countries are having that this evidence, this new evidence, is influencing the policy making, but as well, there are considerations not only for designing the policy, the new policy, but also how to evaluate and assess the policy, which again is a direction where you want then to strengthen in the future, also, proposing an assessment of the better internet for kids in general and this collective impact. Then discussing now about evidence, the evidence gathered by the BIK map this time as well is something extraordinary. You have already mentioned in the beginning, this is really a big achievement that we have this pan-European collection of data. And while I'm saying that, because from the beginning, the BIK map tool has never been, the idea behind is not to have a benchmark, but is to create an exchange of experiences, good practices to learn from each other. So the more information you have, the better it is. But also we have to be brave and humble if you want, and also learn from the mistakes or address the lessons and share these lessons. And so now I come to the second part of your question about the weaknesses. So if I have to mention one weakness, is what also Shimon has just mentioned, is how tricky still to involve the young people and to listen to them in a meaningful way and to give a proper follow-up. So I think to remember that the study showed that only one country out of the 30 really can claim that they are doing policy making together with the young people. The other, they consult, but not in a systematically way. And I think this is an element to be stressed, particularly now, the last day of Safer Internet Forum, where we have seen how valuable is really to listen to young people. And this year we have tried hard to have youth participation from a broader perspective in terms of geography, abilities, everything, inclusiveness. And I think this is really the way to go.
Very good. Thank you, Manuela. Thank you for your words on that. I'll come back to you just at the end in terms of any thoughts or ideas about the future of the BIK strategy. But I want to go to Hans now at this stage, because Hans has been monitoring our feed for questions and comments. So if I hand back to the chair, and if there are any particular questions that we need to take up either with the panel or on the BIK map itself.
Yes, maybe to pick out one particular element which has been discussed in the chat, and I think it relates to the nature of evidence we are collecting. And I think early on in the presentation you mentioned that across many member states, across many countries, there seem to be a lot of formal and informal education awareness raising programs in place, but it still begs the question, do we know if they actually have an impact? So I guess it's a question for you and perhaps also for the wider panel in terms of the kind of evidence we collect. And I think you focused mostly on evidence-based policy making, but do we have a view in terms of programs really being evaluated, some kind of effectiveness research, impact assessment of the programs which are really in place, beyond the fact that we know that apparently they seem to be happening, which of course is already an important thing. And I guess you may have some views on that, but maybe there are some panelists or maybe someone like Shimon who can talk about some of the things they do to see if what they do, if it actually works. So I think that's one particular element which stands out from the chat conversation.
Sure, no, it is a very good point. So in terms of our at the BIK map level, in terms of the questions that we focus on for evidence-based policy making, it is very much in terms of what data collection does take place at the national level, and that's where we have reported a significant increase, and that in itself is very much welcomed, because there clearly were gaps in this area, and there have been advances in national strategies to ensure that this is an area that is in fact actually actively researched on a regular basis. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, that is a weaker part of it. We have some, and it is more anecdotal evidence as such, so perhaps the panelists can contribute to this. But yes, it is the case that even at the national level, there are only limited examples whereby policies are being monitored in that way, but less so for impact. So perhaps, Shimon, do you have some experience in Poland in terms of specific programs that you've been involved in, and where there has been some study of their impact or their effectiveness?
Well, this is a really important question. And of course, this impact is always hard to measure. We have some experience with it, but it taught us that it's really hard to grasp this direct effect, because we are quite able to assess what our target groups think about our actions, and they mostly assess them very positively. But in terms of having data on how their actions changed, it's very hard. For example, we had some studies like that regarding the cyber aggression, and this is very long. You would have to measure it in a longer time frame, and this is usually quite hard. But yeah.
Very good. No, thanks. And I don't know, Martina or Gerhard, do you have any examples or any comments on this evaluation question? Martina, has anything, for example, in the MIL, the media information literacy field, is that something that I know that you're working on?
Yeah, well, as I said before, we are really, since we are at point now to actually start this work off methodologically, we are sort of having assessment in this build, formalizing it, but we're not there yet. And also I want to say, with our survey, Kids and Media also is something that needs an updating. And we are presently working with methodological development, because as Simon was talking about it, it's dependent on self-assessment surveys. Yeah. For example, losing readability, and it's a weak response rate, and also the fact that children today are not able to, how many times do they not pick up their phones, mobile phones, doing something, and then what are they doing? It's very, the media development today brings this to issues.
Yeah. Yeah, no, indeed. And, as we commented in the report, looking at better measures around impact and impact assessment is something that perhaps, could future iterations of the BIK map process might be able to incorporate, because we cover very much spread of activities and programs, but not necessarily measures of their effectiveness. Hans, any other points to pick up at this stage? And then I'm going to give the final word for this part of the panel to Manuela.
So we just got a very long question, so I'll start reading it, but maybe we can pick it up at the very end of the session. So go to Manuela, maybe the next panel, and we can come back to this one later on.
Very good, very good. So Manuela, as I say, I would just, in terms of the possible futures for the BIK strategy, because this has been, I suppose, a monitoring of its development or its implementation since 2012, with 3 iterations now of the BIK map. But is any thinking from the European Commission perspective on how the strategy itself might evolve?
Brian, I was expecting this question. You know why? Because you asked me the same question when 1 year ago, when the poster that now is digital behind me, you can see from there, it was really analogic, and we were in the same room. You presented to the member states expert group the idea of launching the new round of the BIK tool, and of course you were also wondering, okay, by then when we will present the results, what will happen to the strategy? And indeed, 1 year ago, around the forum, we were extremely active in starting an informal stock taking of the strategy, and the results were incredibly positive. I mean, the strategy really has stood well for the test of time. Impressive in such a fast-moving environment. It means that many of the key features, the pillars that you can see drawn here, and then you have transformed into this very nice temple for BIK, are still extremely relevant. But 1 year ago, we didn't have the van der Leyen Commission in place yet. We don't realize now, because this year, the last 11 months, they were so incredibly busy despite the challenging conditions for living and for working. Basically, every month we had a public consultation and we had a new strategy coming out. So Hans has already named all of them in the beginning, so to save time, I'm not going to repeat all of them. But of course, if you think just to July, and before the summer, we had the victims' rights strategy, and then the child sexual abuse strategy, and both of them are so relevant for what we are doing under BIK, notably what the helplines and the hotlines are doing, just to mention one example. And then we have key legislation which is coming out, and all of this just goes in one clear direction. That is also what Khalil has emphasized in the open speech of SIF. The other day is how this commission is trying hard to address inequality and also to rebalance power, to create a level playing field. And this is really to put then the EU core values at the core of the economy and the society that we are building in this digital decade. So all of this to say that now we have a larger framework, and we are not in a rush to update the strategy, because we want to keep this umbrella dimension. So we want really to provide this network of networks that, again, you have suggested in one of your recommendations. And for do that, we need that all the pieces of the puzzle are in place before then we go and we are holistic again. And notably, we have to wait for the children's rights strategy to be adopted in spring, and then possibly offer the digital wing of that. Then events like this one and the Safer Internet Forum are a mine gold for us, because it's where we gather, fresh ideas. We keep up with the new trends. But of course, the day the update of the strategy will start, we will have then formal consultations and many interactions. So I think there will be exciting time ahead. Stay tuned.
Very good, very good. Absolutely, very exciting. And I think it's absolutely a testament to the robustness of the framework itself, that it has evolved naturally in terms of covering the many issues within this digital space. Thank you, Manuela, but also thank you to Martina, Gerhard, and Shimon for your contributions for this part of the discussion. We're actually going to turn now to our second panel, and again, Hans introduced everybody at the beginning, but to welcome Ella Seri from Australia's eSafety Commissioner Office, Daniel Kaldefeld-Winter from the UNICEF Office of Research, Rodrigo Naim from SaferNet Brazil, and Nareen Hashatrian from SaferNet Armenia. So obviously now we are taking what has been a European discussion onto a global stage, and to look at how this corresponds, indeed, where there are divergences between how better internet approaches have been developed and implemented here, and how this is either echoed or whether there are other learnings that we need to take on an international level. So thank you very much to all of you for joining again the discussion this afternoon. And I'll start with Ella, if I could. So it is particularly interesting, I suppose, to turn to Australia, given that many of the things that have been discussed within the BIK strategy, and that we debate further in the BIK report, for example, looking at the collective impact and bringing together these elements in a more focused way, Australia has been through this experience, and Australia has built a model that indeed countries right around in the world are referring to. So you do very much have your own strong tradition in regulating and supporting children's digital experiences. So can I ask for your reflections on this experience of implementing what we've been describing here as the European BIK strategy, or Better Internet for Kids approach?
Sure thing. And thanks, Brian, and thanks and hello to everybody. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all and share some insights from down under. So, as you mentioned, yes, Australia has been implementing, much of the collective impact model. And in Australia, we have multiple ministries feeding into policy, from education to communications, home affairs, digital transformation. And at the federal level, we have an agency heads online safety committee that's designed to coordinate policy. But I think, what's quite unique to Australia is our e-safety commissioner model. And so since 2015, we've had an independent statutory authority in Australia for online safety. We're not a policymaker per se, but we do have responsibility for coordinating across government, industry, and the not-for-profit sector, and to implement the government strategy to keep Australians safer online.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Where is it? Does it stand now? Because I believe you're looking at new legislative developments in this area. So based on the experience of a number of years of having established the e-safety commissioner office, what's the direction ahead?
Well, I mean, in Australia, we are looking at the moment at legislative reform when it comes to our Online Safety Act. So actually, the e-Safety Commissioner was established under legislation in 2015 as the Office of the Children's e-Safety Commissioner, with a range of functions, specifically looking at the online safety of children. At the moment, I think we're looking to broaden some of our powers, not to jump the gun on what's happening in legislative reform in Australia, but we are looking at ways that we can support the online safety of all Australians, looking at both illegal online content but also harmful online content. And I guess, as the world's first government online safety regulator whose sole purpose is the protection of its citizens online, it's our focus on what we call the 3 Ps of prevention, protection, and proactive change that I think is what sets the e-Safety Commissioner model apart.
Right, very good, very good. Okay, thanks, Ella. And turning to Daniel, if I could. So Daniel, given UNICEF's global perspective, of course, how would you compare key trends in big policy making, that we've been talking about here in the European context, with what's happening in the rest of the world, and particularly in those regions in which you're most active?
Sure. Hi, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. So the regions I can speak to are primarily Africa and Southeast Asia. And in terms of BIK-related policymaking in these regions, there's definitely a lot of movement and positive development. So both Africa and Southeast Asia are developing or have joint policy frameworks that are a bit similar to the BIK framework, but with some interesting differences. And for example, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, adopted a declaration on the protection of children from all forms of online exploitation and abuse in November last year. And they're currently developing a regional plan of action for the implementation of this declaration, which will require member states to report on progress against it. And UNICEF has been working alongside ASEAN to support these developments. And in Africa, the African Union adopted the African Union Cybersecurity and Data Protection Convention in 2014, so quite some time ago. And this one spells out Africa-wide cybersecurity policy, and there are provisions in that convention that deals with content-related offenses committed online, some of which concern children, but children are not the main focus there. So under the 4 pillars of the BIK framework, I would say that the ASEAN framework covers 3 of them to some extent. And that's the scaling up of awareness raising and empowerment, creating a safer environment for children, and combating child sexual exploitation and abuse. But as far as I'm aware, there are as yet no provisions for stimulating the production of creative educational content and promoting positive online experiences, neither in the ASEAN framework or the African Union framework. And the ASEAN one is, if I take that as an example, it's concentrated on strengthening legal frameworks, improving law enforcement and judicial capacity, and developing child protection and support services. So it's a very comprehensive plan. And it solidly connects the issue of online exploitation to the existing violence against children agenda, which is really important. But it really is an example where big policy is being addressed by broader policies or under broader policies, which you indicated was the case also in some countries in Europe. And I'll end by saying that, to the best of my knowledge at least, there are no joint policy frameworks currently in Latin America or the Middle East. Though I'd be interested if someone in the audience or panel knows more about that than I do.
Very good. Well, perhaps Rodrigo is well positioned to answer that. So I'm delighted to welcome Rodrigo from SaferNet Brazil. And Rodrigo, as Hans had mentioned at the outset, you and Nareen indeed have both participated in SIC Plus, the Safer Internet Centre Plus initiative. So you're familiar with the European context and so on. But just for a South American view, is it accurate what Daniel is suggesting there, that there's an absence or there's a gap of a unifying framework that defines the policy agenda?
Yeah, Brian, and thanks again for the opportunity. Here in Brazil, SaferNet is working as a kind of safer internet center since 2005, but we don't have a formal strategy, neither a coordination board for better internet for kids. And for sure, we are learning and sharing experience with in Safe in Hope network for many years, but we have a strong child protection organizations and policies, but not exactly for digital approach, and we lack a lot of digital literacy around these child protection networks already existent in Brazil. We have a decentralized policy process in Brazil because we have a nice progress last years, for example, with our Marco Civil Law of Internet that brings a lot of responsibilities, including child protection, but not only, it's a large and broader one. We also have now a data protection framework that include children's and child's rights also. And we have now some regulations around advertisement for children online and offline. So this is an important one. But in this lack of a national strategy and coordination board, we have a lot of policy making process being made reacting from extreme case and moral panic approach that it's really hard to deal with, because there is not best interest of children in the main focus of this issue. So just to say that we, since 2009, we are joined Safer Internet Day globally, and from there we are sharing and learning a lot with your perspective in the beginning of Safer Internet program and others. And but just to say that we can't see as a Latin America country, we have a local context. The context is key for public policies implementations and also process of making these policies, and we can't see like a linear progression from Europe or neither United States means but that we will not face the same problems exactly that you faced years before, because we have now a totally different context. Just a short example to conclude, we have millions of people that started to be online from mobile phones and don't have the experience to have desktops or notebooks before, and this is a total different approach how they are online and how to face educators and parents and even children's participation on that. And just to say that we have a nice progress also with the evidence-based around quantitative data from using the same Kids Online framework, but we have that in annual basis, what is amazing. Each year we have a Kids Online survey nationally. It's important to guide our strategies in the country. And just to conclude, because if you have time,
yeah. No, thank you, Rodrigo. I was going to mention that because indeed, I think many of us in Europe envied the support that research had at an early stage in terms of developing an evidence base for Brazil, and you had very extensive annual surveys in terms of building up and supporting the initiatives that were being taken by organizations such as yours. Has that continued, and has that evidence base been important in terms of making the case and ensuring that good policies are developing?
Yeah, for sure, Brian. We as organization with other multi-stakeholder approach, working with the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee that is responsible for these surveys. We are working with ministries and secretaries for using this data for public policy making. But as I said, especially nowadays in Brazil, we have a really moral panic approach on the Congress, and they don't care a lot about the data sometimes, and we are just trying to enforce this evidence base to guide the process. But in general level of civil society, academia, and other stakeholders, for sure. No. And one progress that we are using also is the cooperation between companies and NGOs using this data to see the reality and try to figure out awareness strategies, and also to engage other stakeholders using the data to see concretely the problem, and not only the ideological approach that we face now in the Congress, especially in Brazil.
Thanks so much, Rodrigo. And I should have said thanks for getting early in the morning, getting up early to join us for the discussion today, because we really are joined by participants right across the world. Finally, on the panel here, to turn to Narine Hashaprian from Safer Internet Armenia. Narine, you're also very, very welcome. And in terms of your experience, also as an organization part of the Safer Internet Center in Armenia, what has been your experience? What have been the challenges as well as the opportunities to get this on the policy agenda, to find a position and I suppose a hearing for better internet issues?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Many thanks, Brian. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I will be speaking on behalf of Safer Internet Armenia. This is a project, a national program, which aims at empowering young people and adults to safely use digital technology. And as the question was about the policies, how successful have been we in implementing the policies, I would like to start with answering your question that the first policy document called Concept on Online Safety and Media Literacy Education in Armenia has been developed back in 2010 by Safer Internet Armenia's experts for the Ministry of Education and Science, and it has been quite successfully implemented throughout the country. Actually, it is important also to mention that all strategy papers up to date have been developed in a bottom-up manner. Coming back to our activities and our success stories, we started working since 2009, and we carried out training and awareness raising activities for children, parents, teachers, and we have reached approximately 70% of Armenia's secondary and high schools. So every year on a Safer Internet Day, a 6-month-long education program is launched in cooperation with authorities, industry, civil society, and community organizations. And traditionally, training and awareness-raising activities have been the strongest component of Safer Internet Armenia. The program has been run by a consortium of partners and Armenia's ministry. We should mention also that the Armenia's Ministry of Education, Science and Sports, regional and municipal authorities have been each year among the partners, as well as industry-related organizations and telecommunication operators. And speaking about successful parts of the program, actually the most successful component is based on open and simultaneous lessons teaching about internet safety, how to protect devices, personal data, and privacy, as well as about well-being online. And those lessons are followed by creative competitions, roundtable discussions for parents and community members, as well as training activities for teachers. And to date, over 300 educational materials, including lesson plans, videos, cartoons, tests, have been produced in frames of Safer Internet Armenia, and those resources are widely used not only by schools, but various child-related, teacher, community organizations, and many of them are available online. Actually, the purpose of our training programs has been twofold. On one hand, we teach about how to handle the influence of ICTs, and also we teach practical skills to take advantage of new technologies. And coming back to the policy issues, many questions related to the general approaches within our countries are still discussed. And if this spread of COVID-19, for instance, have proved everyone that the adoption of technology in the education process cannot be turned back, the issue which has been very much discussed within the country. So now everyone understands that the only thing we can revise, it is our approach to using ICTs in education. So should we focus more on tools or on competencies? Which competencies should we prioritize? Should we stress technical skills to work with ICTs, including coding skills or social skills such as communication, participation skills? Or maybe we should give priority to critical thinking and information literacy. And just recently, I will conclude that we are also implementing researches and surveys. Just recently, in July, September, we have finished the first phase of the research among schools, and the participants of the research, we reached about 1/3 of Armenian schools, and the participants, respondents mentioned inability to cope with information overload and online fatigue have been the most pressing problems occurring during online studies, according to the research. And the difficulty in finding information and difficulty to filter information for importance, also mentioned by a big proportion of surveyed school children. Almost all parents who participated in the research have expressed concerns about children being online longer hours than in pre-COVID period. And they mentioned various problems which overexposure to screens entail. So this was the purpose of the research. It is only the first phase which we have finished. The purpose of this research to examine technological, social, and psychological challenges occurring during online studies, because we are still studying online. due to COVID and also due to recent war imposed on our country. So if we have time, maybe I will conclude also a couple of words about challenges we are facing. We are probably for the next decade, we will be facing increased cybercrime. I already said that we are in a war. People think that it is not finished. We think that we will be facing intense and coordinated disinformation attacks. And it means that we must attach significant importance to cyber safety education within formal and informal education institutions. And on the other hand, media and information literacy should require a more profound and systematic approach from elementary to high school and across curriculum through many subjects. And here again, we need to develop, we need to have new strategies, and this require strong cross-institution collaboration, massive teacher training, which we don't have until now, and a comprehensive action involving everyone, all the stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Narine. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very timely reminder of the challenges continue to evolve as much as our responses. So again, many thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to hand back to Hans, particularly if there's any key questions for the panel or on the overall discussion this afternoon.
Yes, so I'm conscious of time, but I would actually ask Rodrigo perhaps have a look at the chat, because there's a fairly specific question from Carolina, who's also a researcher from Brazil. So you're not the only one waking up early today, specifically in the CSAM area. But maybe you can address it in the chat. And what I would want to do is maybe also go back to quite an ambitious question, I think, from Larissa, also to the first panel, where she asked, is there a EU harmonized approach needed to applying children's rights in a digital environment? So maybe to rephrase that question a bit in terms of, do we expect this to happen? So I think, Brian, from your point of view, I think a lot of the work you have been doing is based on this idea of collective impact. So I think it is expecting some kind of harmonization to take place. But do panelists expect that there will be further harmonization at EU level and perhaps also at the global level? Like, is this gradually going towards a harmonized approach in terms of better internet for kids, or do panelists see big barriers for that to happen? So I know it's quite an ambitious question, but it's maybe a nice one to round off the panel conversation. So yeah.
No, indeed. Just by way of comment, absolutely. I think it's a very valid observation, and much of the thinking behind the BIK strategy is about drawing together, and something that we have tried to emphasize within this version is the importance of coordination, which is not necessarily about adopting the same approach, but it is in fact developing complementarity and looking at strengths in different places and ensuring that those are shared. Anyone on the panel is more than welcome to take this up. But I did wonder, just a question, maybe perhaps for Daniel, from the UNICEF perspective, are you giving guidance to countries around the world, or what guidance would you seek to give, indeed, from a child rights perspective? And is there a direction ahead in terms of this better alignment and focusing of policy in this field?
So I think, UNICEF would typically take a very evidence-focused approach to national level policymaking. And I think you'll appreciate that, Brian, because you've been involved in similar efforts in Europe, supported also by the Commission. But we've funded over the past years, funded and implemented national level research on children's internet use in more than 25 countries under our Global Kids Online project and other projects, which builds on the work of the EU Kids Online Network. I mean, I can give you an example of how we would do it. So we would always implement alongside national governments. So UNICEF Ghana a few years ago, for example, they saw the need for evidence to understand the scope of risks and opportunities online. So we implemented a Global Kids Online study in Ghana together with the government, national NGOs at regional and district levels to prepare for implementation of the research itself, but also subsequent policy change or interventions. So for example, a key finding from that research was that children and parents needed better mechanisms to report incidents of online harassment or crime. So following from the research, the National Cybersecurity Center in Ghana, they developed an app and an online portal with a reporting function for online crimes. And it specifically included a reporting option for children. And a second finding where UNICEF was also very involved was that educational professionals didn't know enough about child online protection issues in Ghana. So they added a module and education on this to a community engagement toolkit that was used to train thousands of professionals across more than 900 schools and communities in Ghana. So for us, it's very much about going from evidence to then evidence-informed policy, and then support government and civil society with the implementation. And that's really how we tend to work as UNICEF.
No, very good. And I think, in terms of, one of the very positive findings from the BIK report, I think it's probably a good point to end on, that I think there's a greater recognition right across European countries in terms of, the vital importance of evidence to support policy, and that is being prioritized, and we can see many, many examples of that. So with that, I would like to thank all of the panelists today, my European colleagues, and thank you so much for your assistance and contributing, and indeed all of the member states and contact points in countries who did so much work to collate all of this information to contribute to the BIK map, and to all colleagues offering your perspectives and support indeed for initiatives in this field. So with that, I hand back to Hans for just the concluding comments and the wrap up for this session.
Thank you very much, Brian. And of course, thank you also for your hard work on the big policy map. And let's hope that you will be able to continue working on this in many, many more iterations. So indeed, we're arriving at the end of this year's Safe Internet Forum, and I will pass on right away to June Lowry Kingston, the head of unit from the Accessibility, Multilingualism and Safe Internet unit at DG Connect. But before doing as such, and this is the last you will see from me today, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly thank also my team at European Schoolnet, the colleagues you've seen on screen, but also the many people working behind the scenes. And of course, I would also like to thank all of our partners and colleagues from across and beyond the European Union, and in particular, the many young people who have been involved throughout the week for their incredible commitment and inspiring contributions. But on this note, let's pass on to June. June, I think you're there somewhere in the room. The floor is yours. And we look forward to your final closing remarks.
I'm ready and willing, and I'm not going to keep anyone past 1:45, hopefully a few minutes sooner. So, dear friends, dear Safer Internet devotees, sadly, another Safer Internet Forum is approaching the end. And as we've all experienced, this has been a forum like no other. The first during the digital decade, incredible, like Manuela said, to think that it's just a year since the Commission took office. And this forum has truly lived up to that attribute by being fully digital, the best of digital, but also, I think, really reflecting the best of human adaptability and flexibility. And thanks to this combination of human and digital, we've had such a wide range of participants, both of different abilities, but also, especially as we've seen this afternoon, literally from all over the world. I think we've had virtually every continent represented apart from Antarctica. So it's a real example of adversity turned into opportunity. And I'm so grateful to everyone present this afternoon for the really useful discussion and all the insights and contact details that are still being shared in the chat. So this forum has clearly come a long way over the last 17 years, when topics like children and mobile phones, I think, were in the spotlight. And the forum, like the BIK policy, as we've heard this afternoon, I think genuinely has stood the test of time. And they've evolved with the ever-evolving digital landscape and with all the opportunities and all the challenges that seem to emerge with almost every click. So compared to, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of attending the forum in Brussels in the person, then I think the rest of us really are missing the networking around the coffees and catching up over lunch and the last evening dinner when we could let our hair down a little bit. And those are things that we might have missed, but well, for myself at least, I think the lack of physical contact this time has been more than compensated by the excellent programme that we've been presented with this year, going from the youth-led sessions to the keynote session, all the deep dives, the discussions today on the policy, and the really excellent results that Brian's been able to present us about the BIK map tool. And looking at it from this global perspective, that's just been so enriching. And for once, there've been no agonizing choices for the participants about which events to miss because we couldn't be everywhere at once. And of course, there haven't been traffic jams or delayed flights. And we really do appreciate those of you who've either got up early or stayed up late to take part, though, across the time zones. And all of this could not have been possible, of course, without a very dedicated and a very professional team at European SchoolNet and in Hope. And so thank you, Hans and Carl and Denton and all the others, whether on the screen or behind the screen, for really making this forum possible and for making us feel that even though we've been distant physically, we really have been together in spirit. So thanks also to all the excellent speakers, both young and old, for opening our eyes and our minds to new directions, to new needs, and for bringing home to us really the reality, especially on Wednesday and Thursday, of those for whom a click isn't just a click, but can really be a digital equalizer and enabler on the road to a more inclusive society. And of course, I must also thank my Safer Internet team at the European Commission for their tireless work and excellent liaison that have also helped make this event such a success. And last but not least, a big thank you to all of you taking part, to the very, very many participants we've had, including the most resilient ones who've stayed with us through 8 sessions across the week to this very last one. You truly deserve your weekend's rest, like Hans and all the rest of the team. At the Commission, as you've heard today, I think we stay firmly committed to child online safety and empowerment. And I really think that this year's forum has made the EU's slogan of United in Diversity more meaningful than ever before. And as you've heard, so the Safer Internet Forum is drawing to its close, but the work continues. And so I invite you to take out your pens and pencils and calendars, or more likely your mobile phones, and draw a big circle around February the 9th, which is Safer Internet Day 2021, when I hope we really will meet together again and be together for a better internet. So stay well, stay safe, online and offline, and we'll meet again soon. Thank you all very, very much.